Good morning, friends, and happy hump day. I'm Xavier, and it's time for the Morning Roundup. I do this little newscast Monday through Friday, and I try to pull the stories that have more of a spotlight for the Black community. Today is Wednesday, October 26th, 2022. Here's today's news just for you. First up, a North Carolina sheriff who disparaged Black employees resigned from Whiteville, North Carolina. A suspended North Carolina sheriff has resigned in the aftermath of a leaked audio recording in which he called Black employees by derogatory names and said they should be fired. This was announced by his attorney on Monday. Attorney Michael Mills made the announcement during a hearing on whether Jody Green, who was elected Columbus County Sheriff in 2018, should be removed from office. This is according to news outlets. Jody Green loves Columbus County and does not want to put the people he has served through this ordeal, Mills told Senior Resident Superior Court Judge Douglas Sasser. The announcement prompted applause from some in the courtroom. The News and Observer, a local news outlet, reported. District Attorney John David had sought Green's removal, alleging that he had engaged in racial profiling of employees both personally and through those under his command. Sasser suspended Green earlier this month until Monday's hearing on the petition for removal. The rest of the hearing was called off, and David, the district attorney for Bladen, Brunswick, and Columbus counties, said it was no longer necessary due to Green's resignation. David had said that he asked the State Bureau of Investigation to probe allegations of obstruction of justice within the sheriff's office. That investigation is ongoing. The recording of the phone call was given to WECT TV by a former sheriff's captain who's now running against Green to be sheriff. Located about 120 miles southeast of Raleigh, Columbus County has about 50,000 people and is approximately 63% white and 30% black. The 2019 call to then Captain Jason Souls came shortly after Green narrowly defeated former Sheriff Lewis Hatcher, who is black. Souls was temporarily acting as sheriff at the time due to a court-mediated agreement that kept Green from assuming the duties of the office while election officials examined the contest, which was ultimately decided by fewer than 40 votes. In the call, Green, who is white, said he believed someone in the sheriff's office was leaking information to Hatcher. He said, "I'm sick of it. I'm sick of these black expletives." Green is recorded as saying, "I'm going to clean house and be done with it, and then we'll start from there." Green was also recorded as saying, "Every black that I know, you need to fire him to start with. He's a snake." Several black officers in leadership positions were later demoted or fired. WECT TV reported that 2 black officers were on the previous sheriff's group of high-ranking officers known as command staff, but that a captain was fired and a lieutenant was demoted after Green was sworn in. Another black sergeant said he was fired shortly after Green was elected. The station reported that several black deputies appear to remain in the sheriff's office in positions below the level of command staff. Green issued a statement arguing that the recording of the 2019 phone call had been edited or altered, but he didn't deny in the statement he was on the call or that he made the statements. Though Green had been suspended since October 4th, he had been campaigning for re-election. His name remains on the ballot in the November 8th election. But if Green wins next month, his office would have an ethical obligation to file a new petition to remove Green based on the same allegations. Get out and vote. Next up, slavery is on the ballot for voters in 5 U.S. states. Voters in 5 U.S. states will soon decide whether to close loopholes that led to a different form of slavery, forced labor by people convicted of certain crimes. None of the proposals would force immediate changes inside the state's prisons, though they could lead to legal challenges related to how they use prison labor. The effort is part of a national push to amend the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. That amendment banned enslavement or involuntary servitude except as a form of criminal punishment. That exception has long permitted the exploitation of labor by convicted felons. Nearly 20 states have constitutions that include language permitting slavery and involuntary servitude as criminal punishments. In 2018, Colorado was the first to remove the language from its founding frameworks by ballot measure, followed by Nebraska and Utah 2 years later. This November, versions of the question go before voters in Alabama, Louisiana, Oregon, Tennessee, and Vermont. Senator Ramesh Akbari, a Democrat from Memphis, was shocked when a fellow lawmaker told her about the slavery exception in the Tennessee Constitution and immediately began working to replace the language. When I found out that this exception existed, I thought, we have got to fix this, and we have got to fix this right away. Our Constitution should reflect the values and the beliefs of our state. Constitutions require lengthy and technically tricky steps before they can be tweaked. Akbari first proposed changes in 2019. The GOP-dominant General Assembly then had to pass the changes by a majority vote in 1 2-year legislative period and then pass it again with at least 2/3 approval in the next. The amendment could then go on to the ballot in the next year of the gubernatorial election. Akbari also had to work with the State Department of Correction to ensure that inmate labor wouldn't be prohibited under her proposal. The proposed language going before Tennessean voters more clearly distinguishes between the two. Slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited. Nothing in this section shall prohibit an inmate from working when the inmate has been duly convicted of a crime. We understand that those who are incarcerated cannot be forced to work without pay, but we should not create a situation where they won't be able to work at all, Akbari said. Similar concerns over the financial impact of prison labor led California's Democratic-led legislature to reject an amendment eliminating indentured servitude as a possible punishment for crime after Governor Gavin Newsom's administration predicted it could require the state to pay billions of dollars at minimum wage to prison inmates. Scrutiny over prison labor has existed for decades, but the 13th Amendment's loophole in particular encouraged former Confederate states after the Civil War to devise new ways to maintain the dynamics of slavery. They used restrictive measures known as black codes because they nearly always targeted black people to criminalize benign interactions such as talking too loudly or not yielding on the sidewalk. Those targeted would end up in custody for minor actions, effectively enslaving them again. Many incarcerated workers make pennies on the dollar, which isn't expected to change if the proposals succeed. Inmates who refuse to work may be denied phone calls or visits with family, punished with solitary confinement, and even be denied parole. Alabama is asking voters to delete all racist language from its constitution and to remove and replace a section on convict labor that's similar to what Tennessee has had in its constitution. Vermont often boasts of being the first state in the nation to ban slavery in 1777, but its constitution still allows involuntary servitude in a handful of circumstances. Its proposed change would replace the current exception clause with language saying slavery and indentured servitude in any form are prohibited. Oregon's proposed change repeals its exception clause while adding language allowing a court or probation or parole agency to alter alternatives to incarceration as part of sentencing. Louisiana is the only state so far to have proposed amendment draw organized opposition over concerns that the replacement language may make matters worse. Even one of its original sponsors has had second thoughts. Democratic Representative Edmund Jordan told the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, last week that he is urging voters to reject it. The nonprofit Council for a Better Louisiana warned that the wording could technically permit slavery again, as well as continue involuntary servitude. Louisiana's constitution now says slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited, except in the latter case as punishment for a crime. The amendment would change that to slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited, but this does not apply to the otherwise lawful administration of criminal justice. This amendment is an example of why it is so important to get the language right when presenting constitutional amendments to voters. This is from the nonprofit group. They said this in a statement urging voters to choose no and lawmakers to try again, pointing to Tennessee's ballot language as a possible template. Supporters of the amendment say such criticisms are part of a campaign to keep exception clauses in place. If this doesn't pass, it will be used as a weapon against us, said Max Parthas, State Operations Director for the Abolish Slavery National Network. The question stands as a reminder of how slavery continues to bedevil Americans, and Parthas says that's the reason to vote yes. We've never seen a single day in the United States where slavery was not legal, he said. We want to see what that looks like, and I think that's worth it. This is why it's so important to vote. Voting day is Tuesday, November 8th, 2022. Voting information is in the link in the description. Next, a Haitian journalist is hospitalized after an assassination attempt. This comes from San Juan, Puerto Rico. A well-known Haitian journalist survived an assassination attempt on Tuesday that left his car riddled with bullets in the capital of Port-au-Prince. This is from officials. Roberson Alphonse, who works at the daily newspaper Le Noveliste and at radio station Magic 9, is hospitalized, but it is expected to recover, according to France Duval, editor for both media. He said Alphonse has undergone 2 operations so far. Also on Tuesday, authorities found the body of another journalist who had been missing for several days. Gary Tess used to host a political talk show in the southern city of Les Cayes, according to the government's Office of Citizen Protection, which said it was extremely worried about the security of journalists in Haiti and urged they be protected. No one has been arrested in either case, although journalists in Haiti have long been the target of warring gangs who have grown more powerful since the July 2021 assassination of President Jovenel Moïse Duval. Duval thanked an unidentified person he said rescued Alphonse and applied a tourniquet to stop the bleeding before medical help arrived. Duval noted that the car had more than 10 bullet holes, adding that neither Alphonse nor any of his colleagues were available for comment. Haiti's Ministry of Culture and Communication said it learned with horror the news of the assassination attempt that occurred in the Delamis neighborhood as Alphonse headed to the radio station for work. The president of Haiti Senate, Joseph Lambert, demanded a judicial investigation. The attack comes more than a month after 2 other journalists identified as Tayson Latigue and Francine Charles were fatally shot and their bodies set on fire while reporting in a slum controlled by gangs. In January, gang members killed 2 other journalists who were reporting on La Boule, a community south of Port-au-Prince. The Miami-based Inter-American Press Association has said this year has been one of the most violent for the press since record-keeping began in 1987. Journalists also are still seeking justice in the March 2018 disappearance of freelance photographer Vladimir Lagenier, who was last seen in Port-au-Prince's Grand Ravine area, one of the poorest and most dangerous. The attack on Alphonse comes just weeks after Haitian leaders requested the immediate deployment of foreign troops as the country faces an unprecedented crisis. One of Haiti's most powerful gangs surrounded a main fuel terminal more than a month ago, demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Ariel Henry as they prevent the distribution of petroleum. Gas stations have shut down, banks and grocery stores are operating unlimited hours, and portable water is becoming scarce as the country battles a cholera outbreak that has killed at least 40 people, with more than 1,750 suspected cases so far. UNICEF warned on Monday that the actual number is likely much higher given underreporting. The agency noted that it has only been able to find a third of the 70,000 gallons of fuel needed to serve more than half of 16 cholera treatment centers in Port-au-Prince. On Tuesday, the European Union said it was extremely concerned about the deterioration of Haiti's situation, adding that it has reached unsustainable levels. The EU regrets that as a humanitarian catastrophe unfolds and protests have been co-opted by gangs, escalating into violence, looting, and territorial gains for armed gangs, political actors have so far failed to find political solution to the crisis. The EU therefore urges all political actors to engage in constructive negotiations to overcome current political crisis and security and humanitarian consequences. Next, singer Mary J. Blige and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden team up for cancer prevention. From Washington, the Biden administration's initiative to spur prevention and treatment of cancer got a dose of celebrity support when Mary J. Blige joined Dr. Jill Biden and the American Cancer Society to announce national meetings on breast cancer and cervical cancer. The Cancer Society pledged to convene the events after President Joe Biden and the First Lady resurrected the Cancer Moonshot initiative this year. The program provides more money for research too, as Dr. Biden said, help us end cancer as we know it, for good. R&B superstar Mary J. Blige said she lost aunts and other family members to breast, cervical, and lung cancer. She has promoted breast cancer screening, especially among Black women who are disproportionately affected through the Black Women's Health Imperative. On Monday, Blige blamed misconceptions about mammograms among Black women and the practice of not wanting other people in our business for disparities in breast cancer outcomes between Blacks and whites. She said she is convinced that had her aunts, godmother, and grandparents been informed about cancer, they would have had a different outcome today. She paused a few times to stay composed. Dr. Biden said the administration's cancer initiative will help encourage collaboration and research, invest in new treatments and therapies, and help people get the best care and support for their loved ones. She said it is about creating a future where we don't have to be afraid of the cancer world anymore. Breast cancer is the leading cancer for women and is the #1 cause of death among Black and Latino women. More than 14,000 women will be diagnosed with cervical cancer this year, resulting in more than 4,000 deaths, she said. Next up, new U.S. prisons chief pledges truth, reform for ailing system. This is also from Washington. The outsider brought in to reform the ailing Federal Bureau of Prisons pledged Monday to hold accountable any employees who sexually assault inmates, reform archaic hiring practices, and bring new transparency to an agency that has long been a haven of secrecy and cover-ups. Colette Peters detailed her vision in a wide-ranging interview with the Associated Press, her first since becoming director nearly 3 months ago. She said she wants to reorient the agency's recruiting and hiring practices to find candidates who want to change hearts and minds and end systemic abuse and corruption. She would not rule out closing problematic prisons, though there are no current plans to do so. As Oregon's prison director, Peters developed the Oregon Way of running prisons, which aims to transform environments inside correctional facilities to be more normal and humane. This is according to the prison's website. She oversaw sharp drops in Oregon's inmate population. Skeptics within the federal prison system's rank and file have derided her approach as hug-a-thug. Peters didn't mind that, but offered a different term, chocolate hearts. Peters said her ideal prison worker is as interested in preparing inmates for returning to society after their sentences as they are in keeping order while those inmates are still locked within the prison walls. Our job, as you've heard me say before, is not to make good inmates, is to make good neighbors. They're coming back to our communities, and so we need to hire the right people on the front end with that kind of thinking to help us do that. It's a departure from the agency's previous recruiting model that stressed the law enforcement aspects of the job. Peters' approach is similar to how prisons are run in Norway, where the focus behind bars is more on rehabilitation and promoting a humane approach. But Peters acknowledges major hurdles to reforming the Justice Department's largest agency, a behemoth of more than 30,000 employees, 158,000 inmates, and an annual budget of around $8 billion. Peters has visited 3 federal prisons so far as director. Low staffing has hampered responses to emergencies and slowed the implementation of the First Step Act, a criminal justice overhaul championed by Democrats and Republicans in Congress. We are looking for people who want to change hearts and minds, who want to make good neighbors, and safety and security is a top priority. And so that is a paradigm shift, and I hope it's one that recruits the right people. This is in regard to the staffing crisis exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic and only worsened as the agency looks for new ways to recruit officers and retain a staff. A 2021 AP investigation found nearly 1/3 of federal correctional officers' positions were vacant, forcing prisons to use cooks, teachers, nurses, and other workers to guard inmates. Now, the Bureau of Prisons finds itself not only competing with other law enforcement agencies and corporate employers, but with fast food restaurants offering signing bonuses. In some cities, the biggest hurdle has been cost of living burdens. And in rural communities, the agency has struggled to find many qualified applicants. Peters also vowed to have zero tolerance for any employee who abuses their position or sexually abuses inmates in their care. We need to continue to hold people accountable, let people see and understand that if you engage in this type of egregious activity, you're going to prison, she said. A year ago, the Justice Department took the bold step of closing one of its more troubled facilities, the Manhattan jail where financier Jeffrey Epstein killed himself in 2019. Peters said the agency has yet to determine if the jail, the Metropolitan Correctional Center, will reopen. a task that would require a pricey structural overhaul. She also isn't ruling out closing more prisons as repair bills pile up and inmate populations shift. We'll always be analyzing the infrastructure. We have billions of dollars in backloaded infrastructure repairs that need to happen at all of our institutions. At some point, there's a return on investment where there's just the cost of repairing them and it's just too high. Associated Press reporting has revealed rampant sexual abuse and other criminal conduct by staff, dozens of escapes, deaths, and severe staffing shortages that have hampered responses to emergencies. I have said in this room I need to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. We cannot have any surprises. We have to know what is happening inside our agency so we can help. The Bureau of Prisons has also started to spot check security cameras at prisons across the U.S. to ensure officers are conducting rounds to check on inmates held in segregated housing units. A major controversy after 2 officers who were supposed to be guarding Jeffrey Epstein falsified documents claiming to have checked on him while they were really sleeping and shopping online. Sad news for basketball player Brittany Griner as the Russian court rejected an appeal of her 9-year sentence. This is from Moscow. A Russian court on Tuesday rejected an appeal by U.S. basketball star Brittany Griner of her 9-year prison sentence for drug possession, a step that could move her closer to a possible high-stakes prisoner swap between Moscow and Washington. The 8-time All-Center for the WNBA's Phoenix Mercury and a 2-time Olympic gold medalist was convicted August 4th after police said they found vape canisters containing cannabis oil in her luggage at Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport. Griner, she wasn't at the Moscow Regional Airport hearing, but she appeared via video link from a penal colony outside the capital where she is held. At her trial, Griner admitted to having canisters in her luggage, but she testified that she packed them inadvertently in her haste to make her flight and had no criminal intent. Her defense team presented written statements saying she had been prescribed cannabis to treat chronic pain. The 9-year sentence was close to the maximum of 10 years, and Griner's lawyers argued after the conviction that the punishment was excessive. They said in similar cases, defendants have received an average sentence of about 5 years, and about a third of them were granted parole. While upholding the sentence, the court said Griner's prison time will be recalculated to reflect what she has already served in pretrial detention. 1 day in pretrial detention will be counted as 1.5 days in prison, so she will still have to serve about 8 years in prison. Her arrest in February came at a time where there were heightened tensions between Moscow and Washington, and just days before Russia sent troops into Ukraine. At that time, Brittany was returning to play for a Russian team during the WNBA's offseason. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called the decision another failure of justice, compounding the injustice of her detention, adding that securing her release is our priority. Before her conviction, the U.S. State Department declared Griner to be wrongfully detained, a charge that Russia has sharply rejected. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has said in a statement that President Joe Biden is willing to go to extraordinary lengths and make tough decisions to bring Americans home. The WNBA Players Association said the ruling was further verification that Brittany Griner is not just wrongfully detained, she's very clearly a hostage. Reflecting growing pressure on the Biden administration to do more to bring Griner home, Blinken took the unusual step of revealing publicly in July that Washington had made a substantial proposal to get Brittany home, along with Paul Whelan, an American serving a 16-year sentence in Russia for espionage. Blinken didn't elaborate, but the Associated Press and other news organizations have reported that Washington has offered to exchange Brittany and Whelan for Victor Bout, a Russian arms dealer who is serving a 25-year sentence in the U.S. and once earned the nickname the Merchant of Death. The U.S. and Russia carried out a prisoner swap in April. Moscow released U.S. Marines veteran Trevor Reed in exchange for the U.S. releasing a Russian pilot, Konstantin Yoroshenko, who was convicted in a drug trafficking conspiracy. Moscow also has pushed for other release of other Russians in U.S. custody. One of them is Alexander Vinik, who is accused of laundering billions of dollars through an illicit cryptocurrency exchange. He was arrested in Greece in 2017 and extradited to the U.S. in August. Vinik's French lawyer Frédéric Perrault told Russian newspaper Izavista last month that his client hoped to be a part of a possible swap. The newspaper speculated that another possible candidate was Roman Selesnev, the son of a Russian lawmaker. He was sentenced to 27 years in 2017 for 27 years in prison for hacking and credit card fraud scheme. Just so you know, I'm working on a deep dive in the entire Brittany Griner situation, and that will be on the Black Case Files. It'll be linked below. Everybody's heard me talking about get out and vote, make your vote count, and here are the Black candidates who could make history on election night. 24 Black major party candidates are battling for U.S. Senate, governor, and other high positions across the country. This is already a record, and if successful, some of the candidates would be the first Black people to hold the top elected offices in their states. There have been 7 Black senators and 2 governors elected in the nation's history since Reconstruction. At least 28 have had a Black representative in Congress, and Black Americans hold 56 states in the House. In the midterms, there are 11 running for Senate, 5 running for governor, and about 8 running for high offices like Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, and Secretary of State. To that note, these elections could produce some historical firsts for their Black candidates. Here are the Black major party candidates who could make history if they win high office races in the midterms. This list was compiled by Shar Adams, and the full link to the list will be included in the link below. In Arkansas, Natalie James is a Democrat. She's running against GOP incumbent John Boozman for U.S. Senate and would be the first Black member of Congress from Arkansas if successful. A small business owner and community organizer, she has vowed to prioritize health care, education, and economic growth. This comes at a time when Black women are running for local, state, and federal offices in record numbers. This is according to Higher Heights for America, PAC, a political action committee that works to elect Black progressive women nationwide. Chris Jones. In Arkansas, Democrat Chris Jones would be the first Black governor in the state's history if he beats out Donald Trump's former press secretary, Republican Sarah Huckabee Sanders. He spent his campaign visiting every county in the state, promising to promote education and economic growth if elected. Alabama, Yolanda Flowers. In Alabama, Democrat Flowers is battling GOP incumbent Governor Kay Ivey to become governor. Flowers would be the first Black woman to hold the office in Alabama, and she's already made history as the first Black woman from either major party to win the nomination for governor. A former educator, Flowers has said she would work to address gender-based pay disparities and reform criminal justice system if elected. Will Boyd. Boyd, a Democrat, would be the state's first Black U.S. senator if he beats out his Republican opponent, Katie Britt, in the midterms. A pastor in Florence, Boyd has long dedicated his influence to education, supporting workers, small businesses, and affordable health care. Although his campaign has struggled with fundraising compared to Britt's, he has remained hopeful, with a campaign spokesperson telling the Alabama news outlet WHNT, "Fortunately for us, money alone doesn't determine who wins elections." In California, Angela Underwood Jacobs. Republican Underwood Jacobs is hoping to replace Democratic incumbent Eleni Kounalakis as California's lieutenant governor, a position that has served as a stepping stone to becoming governor in the past. Underwood Jacobs, who has campaigned on public safety, housing, and lowering taxes, would be the first Black woman to hold office. In Connecticut, Stephanie Thomas. Democrat Thomas, a small business owner, could become Connecticut's first Black Secretary of State. She is battling Republican Dominic Rapini for the position. Thomas has spent years working with nonprofit organizations and has focused her campaign on combating voter suppression and false claims of voter fraud. In Florida, U.S. Representative Val Demings, a Democrat and currently a 3-term congresswoman, is battling Republican Senator Marco Rubio in Florida for a Senate seat. If she wins, Demings, who has already made history as Orlando's first woman police chief in 2007, would be the first Black person to represent Florida in the U.S. Senate. She'd be the second Florida woman in the office after some 40 years. Demings, who was on Joe Biden's shortlist for vice president, has vowed to protect voting rights and prioritize public safety and employment. Aramis Ayala. Democrat Ayala is running for Attorney General in Florida against Republican incumbent Ashley Moody, and if successful, would be the state's first black attorney general. She's already made history as Florida's first black state attorney in 2016 and made headlines in 2017 when 2 Orlando Police Department officers pulled her over for what some called an unnecessary traffic stop. Ayala is a fierce death penalty opponent, but has received mixed reactions when she announced that her state's attorney's office would stop seeking death sentences. Georgia. Stacey Abrams. No black woman has ever been elected governor of Georgia. Now in her second bid for the position, all eyes are on Abrams, the Democratic nominee, and her GOP opponent, Governor Brian Kemp, in the contentious race. Abrams has championed progressive ideas like extending child care and raising pay for teachers. Since her 2018 upset to Kemp, Abrams has prioritized combating voter suppression and mobilizing voters. Prior to her first bid for governor, she founded the New Georgia Project, which emerged as one of the most fervent voter support groups in 2020. In Iowa, Deidre DeGier, Iowa Democratic gubernatorial candidate. DeGier is among a handful of black women who would potentially make history if they win their races and become the first black woman governors in the U.S. DeGier, the first black woman to earn a major party's nomination for Iowa governor, is trying to upset Republican incumbent Kim Reynolds. With limited campaign funds, DeGier has relied on a grassroots approach, visiting counties across the state to spread her message of stronger education policies and reproductive rights. In Kentucky, Charles Booker. Democrat Booker is up against Republican incumbent Rand Paul to represent Kentucky in the U.S. Senate. He would be the first black person elected to the Senate from that state. Booker, a former state lawmaker, has not minced words about his opponent, calling Paul a barrier to progress. This is according to the Associated Press. He's campaigned on plans to expand healthcare access, defend reproductive rights, and address climate change. In Louisiana, Gary Chambers. Chambers, a Democrat, would be the first black U.S. Senator from Louisiana if he wins his long-shot bid for the seat against Republican incumbent John Kennedy. A Baton Rouge area activist, Chambers has prioritized education, health care, and job creation. Maryland, Wes Moore. Moore, a Democrat, would be Maryland's first black governor and the third black elected governor in the country if he beats out Republican Dan Cox. Moore, the former head of the anti-poverty nonprofit the Robin Hood Foundation, has drawn praise from Oprah Winfrey and President Joe Biden. He has said he is focusing his campaign on the economy and education. U.S. Representative Anthony Brown. Democrat Brown is hoping to leave his Maryland congressional seat to become the state's first black attorney general. The Army veteran is running against the far-right Republican Michael Perotuka. If successful in the midterms, Brown would replace Attorney General Brian Frosh, who last year announced his retirement and said he would not seek re-election. Brown has campaigned on issues including public safety, with vows to address gun violence and the juvenile justice system. Massachusetts. Andrea Campbell, a Democrat, a former Boston City Council president, would become Massachusetts' first black woman attorney general if she beats out Republican Jay McMahon. Campbell unsuccessfully ran for mayor of Boston in 2021 before seeking the attorney general position. Attorney General Maura Healey, who is running for governor, has supported Campbell's bid for attorney general. And this is according to NBC Boston affiliate WBTS. She has pointed to gun restrictions, mental health, and the opioid crisis as issues she prioritized if elected. Rayla Campbell. Republican Campbell is looking to unseat incumbent Secretary of State William Galvin, a Democrat, and become the first black woman to hold the office in Massachusetts. Campbell is a controversial figure, having falsely claimed the 2020 election was rigged per CNN and having made an unsubstantiated claim about educators encouraging sex acts among young children, WPTS reported. North Carolina. Sherry Beasley. Democrat Beasley of North Carolina is running for U.S. Senate against GOP Representative Todd Budd. If successful, she would be the first black woman elected to the chamber in the state's history. In 2019, she became the first black woman to serve as Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court. Her campaign is focused on issues like affordable health care and employment. In New York, Joe Pinion. Pinion, a Republican, is running against Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer for the U.S. Senate in New York. He received GOP support during his campaign and would be the first black senator from New York if elected. A political commentator turned politician, Pinion has said the economy, crime across his state, and education are among his main priorities. In Ohio, Chelsea Clark. If Clark, a Democrat, wins against Republican Secretary of State Frank LaRose, she will become the first Black woman to hold the office in Ohio. Clark, a small business owner and founder of an education nonprofit, the STEM Lab, has focused her campaign on issues like voter suppression and supporting small businesses. Clark and LaRose have butted heads on redistricting, with Clark worried that Republicans will pass gerrymandered congressional maps in the redistricting process. The National Democratic Redistricting Committee has endorsed Clark, and this is according to the State House News Bureau. In Pennsylvania, Austin Davis, Democrat Davis, would be Pennsylvania's first Black lieutenant governor if he's elected over Republican State Representative Kerry Del Russo. Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro and the Human Rights Campaign, PAC, have endorsed Davis. In South Carolina, Crystal Matthews. Matthews, a Democrat, is fighting to oust Republican U.S. Senator Tim Scott and become the first Black woman to represent South Carolina in the U.S. Senate. Matthews, who has served in the State House of Representatives since 2018, has already made history as the first Black woman to represent the state's 117th district. Last month, some Democrats called on Matthews to drop out of the race after leaked audio appeared to show her making disparaging remarks about white voters. This is reported by the AP. She has refused to step down. In Wisconsin, Mandela Barnes. Wisconsin could have its first Black senator in Democrat Barnes if he defeats incumbent GOP Senator Ron Johnson. He already made history in 2018 when he became the state's first Black lieutenant governor. He's credited with helping oust former Republican Governor Scott Walker alongside now Governor Tony Evers. Earlier this month, news broke that former President Barack Obama would head to Wisconsin for an event on October 29th to boost Barnes in the tight battle. That was a lot. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Keep up with me on Instagram at the Morning Roundup. I also have another show called The Black Case Files, where I do more of a deep dive on murders, mysteries, conspiracies, and history, focusing on people of color. That show is always linked below. Make sure you are registered to vote, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye, friends.